Well, certainly appreciate all the stuff, both from USDA, but the whole administration of this week of Council of Presidents and Public Policy Conference. Had a lot of great access to the administration, so appreciate that. And a good way to the end of the week with the Deputy Secretary on a Minnesota call. So.
Yeah. Well, glad. Thank you very much, Kevin. Thanks for this opportunity to join you today. And yeah, it's great to be joining, my home state. Always have time to join, and great to look forward to visiting with your board.
Well, appreciate that. We're going to go live here. We always start on time. So Amber, are you or whoever's running the show, are we ready to get close to?
We're close. We'll get a few more seconds.
What are they seeing on their screen?
The PowerPoint. We're ready to go at noon.
Okay.
So we're live on Facebook and through Zoom.
Okay. And it is 12 o'clock. Are we on, Amber?
We are good to go, Mr. President.
Okay, this is Kevin Papp, Minnesota Farm Bureau President. Welcome you to the second of our shop talks. I'm coming from our shop in southern Minnesota. Full transparency, it's not my shop, or it is my shop. I'm not live. I honestly have better Wi-Fi at the kitchen table than I do out in the machine shed. So just want to welcome everybody. And before we really get started, I'm going to ask Amber. I know Amber is in the Minnesota Farm Bureau headquarters, but I'm going to ask Amber to go to the war room a little bit and give us a feel of what it looks like in there, Amber.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, your Minnesota Farm Bureau team is working to make sure we don't have any technical difficulties through this virtual meeting experience.
And we really want to thank, it does take a team effort. This has gone very well. Couple of just details as we get started. Everybody will be muted that is on the call. There's no video of you, just video of us. But we are muted. There will be a chance to ask questions. So depending on what you're using for a device, there's a question and answer button. Feel free to use that. You can raise your hand to do that. If you're joining us on a conference call with the phone, you'll have to hit *9 to request a question. But it's with a great honor that I have the opportunity to introduce our special guest, somebody that has deep Minnesota roots. As you saw Amber spin the camera around, you saw the FFA and 4-H flag in our Farm Bureau state office in the boardroom. And that's certainly something Deputy Secretary Steve Semsky is aware of, is some of those Minnesota roots as well. Mr. Deputy Secretary, I can tell from your background that you're in DC. We've had the pleasure at Minnesota Farm Bureau many times to visit with you and the Secretary and others. So that office looks familiar. So welcome to Minnesota Farm Bureau, and we really appreciate your time. And I would turn it over to you, Mr. Deputy Secretary.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much, Kevin. It is great to be with you here today, and really appreciate this opportunity to join you. It is always good in this, even in this age of COVID, it is great to be back with my home pod of Minnesota. So really appreciate this opportunity to join you all here today. What I thought I might do is just give a little bit of an update on a few topics, and then happy, Kevin, however you want to proceed, whether just end it there or whether you want to open it up for any dialogue. I don't know how you want to handle that, but I thought I would give just a little bit of an update on the coronavirus food assistance program and kind of the outlook for funding there. Talk a little bit on meat processing, and I know that's been a big issue that we've been paying a lot of attention to, the renewable fuel standard, trade, and innovation. So on the coronavirus food assistance program, certainly, as you all know, President Trump announced a $19 billion program to try to help farmers and ranchers. You know, as we have seen the markets greatly impacted by the coronavirus. Obviously, as everyone knows, we, you know, basically lost half of the demand that was going to the restaurant and the food service and institutional trade. And so we had to respond quickly. The president asked us to put together that package, which Secretary Perdue and myself and our whole team here at USDA worked on. As you know, that $19 billion package includes $16 billion in payments to farmers and $3 billion in food boxes to try to help folks. Of that $16 billion that was announced, we moved quickly to try to both write the rule for that, get it out. We, you know, basically used all the available dollars that we had at the time, both the $9.5 billion that was given to us by Congress, as well as we looked at what were balances we had within the Commodity Credit Corporation, about another $6.5 billion, and put together that program. So far, we've received about 409,000 applications from farmers across the United States. You know, as of Monday, we had paid out just under $6 billion of that, and still more coming. We know one of the things that we recognized when, and you've heard Secretary Perdue say this, we recognize that, you know, what we were able to put together with the available resources provided by Congress and what we had left in the Commodity Credit Corporation wasn't enough. And so certainly, you know, we've been working and talking to Congress, well, I know that you have, and Farm Bureau, Minnesota Farm Bureau, American Farm Bureau have been very active in working with Congress to try to provide more resources. And certainly we're very supportive of that, and hope that that's going to be enough. You know, that more funding is going to be available to try to help producers deal with some of the shocks to the markets that we've felt. We made, as you know, in the first round of the $16 billion, we're paying out on 80% of what was calculated, holding 20% in reserve because we didn't know exactly what the demand was going to be. We just recently announced some more commodities that were eligible for assistance. But at least right now, I think it's looking like, you know, we are going to have sufficient funds, and so that we will be able to pay out that remaining 20% on this initial tranche of that $16 billion. Probably that decision we won't be able to make yet for, you know, a few weeks yet, but certainly at this point in time, it's looking like we will be able to pay out on that, you know, 20% that we were holding in reserve. In terms of Congress, you know that the Senate's coming back into town next week. They're going to be working on the next, you know, coronavirus assistance program. Certainly, you know, we're hoping and it's looking like there will be assistance for agriculture in there, and we'll continue to work with the Congress on what that's going to look like. With regard to the food boxes, you know, we announced over $3 billion, up to $3 billion was going to be available there. You know, a dairy box, a meat box, a fruit and vegetable box, or a combo box. And we've distributed, as of yesterday, about 40 million of those boxes nationwide, and we still got more going, and so we're really excited about that. really has been really to supplement the other food that's being made available through food banks and food pantries to people in need. It's been very successful where we've been able to take product, off the market to try to help farmers. We put together those food distributors and we're serving people. And that's just a win-win situation, win-win-win situation. That's been really, really positive, and we're getting a lot of good feedback on that. We're going to continue to implement that program as we go forward to serve folks, because we know that there's people out there that need that, and we've already announced some additional contracting there. On the livestock side, I know that Minnesota, among other states, and the livestock industry was really hit hard by COVID and the slowdown or the shutdown of our meat processing plants when that happened. We're very appreciative. President Trump took decisive action to give the Secretary of Agriculture the authority to utilize the Defense Production Act in order to make sure that we were able to process these animals and supply protein to the American people. And we have seen from, of course, there were some major slowdowns, whether that's in Worthington, Minnesota, whether that was in Sioux Falls, whether that's in Wilmer at some of the turkey processing plants. But we have seen, we've seen that production. We've been working very successfully since that time to really get those processors back up online, working with the companies, state officials, local governments to get that back in line. As taking a look, we track on a daily basis how we're doing and what the slaughter capacity is. As of looking at what was happening yesterday, our poultry was the same as it was a year ago at about 33.6 million birds a day. Our swine was actually up 1% from what it was a year ago at 470,000 head. And our cattle was down just slightly, down 2% at 119,000 head. But we are basically back up to normal. We know that we need to try to keep those plants open and keep that going because we know what kind of impact that has on producers. And certainly I know that Minnesota producers certainly felt that when there was the slowdown and the shutdowns of some of those plants. A couple of words on the renewable fuel standard. We know how important that is to demand and to farmers in Minnesota and elsewhere across the country. As you know, Secretary Perdue, myself, all of us at USDA been working closely with the president to make sure that he knows the importance of renewable fuels. I think you've seen that, the year-round waivers to allow E15 to be sold year-round. Our work last fall and what was announced to try to mitigate the impacts of small refinery exemptions. We've worked so that the administration, we weren't appealing the 10th Circuit ruling with regard to small refinery exemptions. And just we know how important that is. One program that we're implementing that we're really excited about here at USDA, and this came out of the agreement that was reached last fall with the president, with EPA, USDA, is what can we do to build out the infrastructure across the United States so that we have more commercial demand. And as part of that, we pledged $100 million of CCC funds to provide incentives for the sales of higher blends of both ethanol and biodiesel. And so we've announced that back in May. We have the application program open now for that $100 million to give incentives to service stations and fuel distributors on what they can do to put in that infrastructure that it's needed to sell and distribute those higher blends. Because we think in the long term, we think that if consumers know and have a choice that they can have higher octane fuel, that they can get it at the same or a cheaper price, we think that provides that market-driven demand that we need, and we just need to try to help jumpstart some of that infrastructure and distribution. On trade, just a few words there. Obviously, we know how important trade is to the profitability of farmers and ranchers. I think the good news is, we've seen some pretty choppy waters on trade the last couple of years. But I think there's a lot of positive things going despite what happened with COVID. The Japan FTA came into effect on January 1. Japan was always the crown jewel of the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations. And so we've, have reduced or eliminated tariffs on over $7 billion of U.S. ag exports going into Japan. Mexico and Canada, under the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, that went into effect on July 1, and I think that provides a lot of stability there on trade. And then, of course, the big one where there's been, of course, a lot of choppy waters is on China. And then we entered into that phase 1 trade agreement with China, getting them to agree for the first time to, not only address some really long-standing market access barriers in agriculture that had been frustrating our trade for years and even decades, but also to getting them to address, of course, intellectual property, which is a big part of the agreement, as well as to make some major purchases of U.S. goods and services, including U.S. farm goods. $36.5 billion is our expectation, and that we're going to be holding them to that in calendar year 20. That went into effect then in February. Of course, we've been a little bit affected by COVID, but I think we've seen China, really stepping up and making some large purchases. Of course, earlier this week, they made the largest ever corn purchase at nearly 1.8 million metric tons. That follows from last Friday, 1.3 or 1.4 million metric tons. They've been making some substantial soybean purchases. Just today, we announced at USDA under our export sales reporting, another 522,000 metric tons of soybeans to China, and another 351,000 metric tons to what are right now being classified by the exporter as, quote, unknown destinations. But as all of you know, sometimes those, I think a lot of folks in the trade are expecting that to be China. We don't know that for sure yet, but that is certainly what a lot of folks in the market are expecting. Finally, on innovation and regulation, we have been, and I just want to, you as producers know how important this is. Farm Bureau has been an absolute leader on this and pushing to make sure that you are able to do what you do best, and that's innovate and farm and be responsible stewards without the overreaching, hand of the federal government. I think you've seen from this administration really a lot of action there on whether it's on the waters of the U.S. and the withdrawal of that rule and reproposal there of something that makes much more sense. Just yesterday, the administration announced reforms to the National Environmental Policy Act that affects a lot of infrastructure projects and grazing and things like that. That the federal government needs to complete its work on an environmental impact statement within 2 years or an environmental analysis within 1 year, and making sure that it's really focused on environmental assessments and making sure that a lot of extraneous things aren't thrown in there. We announced at USDA, Secretary Perdue announced in late February our Ag Innovation Agenda. And there we want to, frankly, by 2050, we want to double U.S. agriculture productivity while reducing our agriculture footprint by 40%. And you know, there we really want to be moving forward. We know that innovation is the key. You know, part of that, related to that, right now we're engaged in working within the administration and with our Food and Drug Administration on how do we make sure that animal biotechnology, we've already seen the benefits of plant biotechnology. Unfortunately, the approach that's been used by the federal government toward animal biotechnology has really stifled things, but we're pushing hard to make sure we get some changes there so that we can continue to innovate. Bottom line is that we know how important both the environment and production is. We face the twin goals of feeding a growing world population that's going to reach almost 10 billion by 2050. We also know that we have to address climate issues. We think that innovation is the key where you can have climate smart agriculture and we're able to move forward in a very responsible way. We think agriculture can be a large part of the solution rather than the problem, as sometimes it is sometimes painted to be by those. We think that agriculture and farmers, if they're allowed and given the tools, can really be successful and are the solution. So with that, Kevin, I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary. We certainly appreciate your time, your commitment. Again, that connection to Minnesota. I think a lot of Minnesota farmers, Farm Bureau members, you know, some do, some don't. Certainly you have a connection to Minnesota. If we go out that door, we see in the screen and not many feet down the hallway, we've got Undersecretary Ted McKinney from Trade. I've known you from the late 80s, known Undersecretary McKinney as my Teflon representative, but I always say Mankato, but he corrects me to say Kasota, Minnesota. And then just this week, we heard from our chief economist at USDA, Rob Johansson, who addressed us virtually with his background, was the Minnesota State Fair and has Minnesota connections as well. So appreciate everything you do, the entire team does at USDA, and we look forward to continuing to working together. So thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, and good luck to you and all of your members. Look forward to seeing you in person soon.
All right, thank you. Next on the agenda is our next speaker is Dr. John Newton. And if I think my technology is right, I am going to share content. Now, when a lot of times when people go to DC and they think about different folks of, are they real? Are they connected? Do they remember their roots? When I think of Dr. Newton, I think of this picture. And this picture just proves that although he is a very widely known and recognized economist, he doesn't forget his family. So Dr. Newton, as introduction, would you just tell the rest of the group what's going on here in the middle of a meeting with all the Farm Bureau state presidents in the room as well as others? Dr. Newton.
I owe you for this one.
I think it's a great story.
So my grandmother discovered Uber, and so she would call me and ask for Uber rides from time to time. And she needed to go to the doctor, so she told me she was going to call and request what she calls them goobers. She doesn't call them Ubers; she calls them goobers. And so she called and said she needed a goober. I think she was actually going to get her nails done on this particular day. So when she called, it was in the middle of the board meeting, so I had to step back and make sure I could get her her Uber ride.
I would just add, Dr. Newton, that makes you very real and understand family, the value of family, and very, very impressed with that. So again, appreciate all you do on behalf of farmers and ranchers. I would just also say that to anybody on the webinar today, if they're not using Market Intel or don't have you in their Twitter feed, they're not getting all the great information out there. So again, Dr. John Newton from American Farm Bureau, our chief economist. So Dr. Newton, please.
Thanks so much. And you forgot to tell everybody about my Minnesota roots. You call it roots, Minnesota roots. It's hard to believe, we've been in this coronavirus situation for so long, but one of the last trips I took before this all happened was up there to Otter Tail Lakes. And that's where I discovered, I did polar bear plunge. I discovered minnow shots. And then I also discovered Zorba's Pizza. So I can't wait to get back up to Minnesota when all this is over with and do all that again. It was a great experience. And let's see, I'm going to share my slides. Can you see everything here? Can you see my slides, President Pat? All right, good deal. Well, I think a lot of what I'm going to talk about, the Deputy Secretary also covered to some extent. So, I think if we go back and just think about what we were coming out of in 2019, we had faced 2 years of headwinds on the trade front with respect to retaliatory tariffs. We go into 2019 thinking it was going to be a better year. And then in March, we got hit with record rainfall across portions of Iowa, Missouri, and Nebraska. Come later that spring, the rain never stopped in some parts of the country. And we ended up with nearly 20 million acres that went unplanted in 2019. So coming into 2020, I think everybody knew that those acres were going to come back online. We saw that in the most recent June acreage report. USDA projects corn acres at about 92 million acres, soybeans at about 85. That's a big jump from where we were last year. So we knew we were going to have bigger supplies on the crop side. We also knew that we were walking into a year where we expected record or near record production in the livestock categories. Poultry production was expected to be record high, pork production record high, beef production up 1%, milk production record high. So 2020 was really shaping up to be a year where on the back of the 3 trade deals, the USMCA, the phase 1 with China, and the US-Japan agreement, we knew that we had the supplies. It was really a matter of whether or not demand could keep up. And I think the USDA had forecasted that net farm income would increase about 3% in 2020 on the back of these trade deals. So I think folks were optimistic that we were rounding third and headed to home, and that 2020 would be a better year for agriculture and for the agriculture industry. And it was, I gave a very similar presentation to you, President Papp, at the March board meeting. And it was the very next day after the March board meeting that the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus a pandemic. And we all know what immediately happened with respect to COVID-19, with schools closing, with stay-at-home orders, with social distancing. Where we are today, we continue to see cases rise across the United States. While many of the economies around the country have began to reopen, I think watching this curve, watching how it's accelerating, even though the number of deaths are nowhere near where they were in mid-April, the fact that we continue to spread cases around the country could provide some headwinds through the remainder of this year for the agricultural sector. So we need to continue to monitor that. I think we saw that in the ethanol industry over the last couple of days with the spread of COVID-19. The demand for gasoline is likely to fall, and that could hit the ethanol industry. But it's well known at this point, the impacts of COVID-19. We had farmers that lost markets. We had producers that had to dump milk, specialty crops that had to get plowed under, just all sorts of supply chain challenges in the agricultural industry that impacted farmers and ranchers, specialty livestock producers. My phone's been ringing off the hook since mid-March with people that have just had unprecedented disruptions in their farm and ranching businesses with respect to COVID-19. The most immediate challenge outside of the labor issues that we worked on very early on was, more than half the food in the country was consumed outside of home. 53% was consumed away from home in 2018. We spent nearly nearly $2 trillion on food in 2018. And so with the stay-at-home orders, with restaurants closing, with schools closing, with airline demand plummeting, we had some challenges, some logistical challenges, moving all that demand through the grocery store channel. And so when we look at Census Bureau data, this is retail data, grocery store sales reach a record high in March of $73 billion. They continue to be at elevated levels. In May, they were at $67 billion. That's 23% higher than what it was prior to the coronavirus. On the other hand, food service and drinking establishments saw their sales decline by $30 billion in 1 month as restaurants closed down across the country. We have seen food service pick up. In May, it was up about 40% from the previous month, but we're still about 20 billion below where we would normally be this time of year in terms of food service restaurant demand. So a very, very significant disruption to the food supply chain, dealing with food that was going into these food service channels, having to move through the grocery channel. One of the early questions I got was, well, people still need to eat. So are they just going to take the dollars that they would have spent in the restaurant and take it to the grocery store? And that's not what we saw. When you take into consideration total expenditures in the restaurant and grocery space, over the last 3 months, we've spent $50 billion less compared to 2019. So I think that can highlight not only the challenges on the demand side, but again, points to some of the supply chain disruptions that we had. You think about what type of products that people are consuming through the grocery chain, ground beef, saw their prices skyrocket, whereas more premium cuts of beef that people just aren't comfortable cooking at home saw their prices fall. And so we had disruptions in the prices of food as well, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in just a moment. When we look just on an inflationary level, when you bring all that foot traffic to the grocery store, and when you think about the grocery stores bidding up wholesale prices to make sure that when you go to the store, they've got eggs on the shelf, they've got beef, they've got pork chops, chicken, all that in the meat case. Grocers were A, bidding up the prices so they had products on the shelves, and B, they didn't need to run specials because they knew consumers were going to be coming to their grocery stores. It wasn't as competitive to get people into your local grocery stores after COVID. So we saw significant inflation. Egg prices were up 20% year over year. Ground beef was up 17% year over year. You can go through this whole list, but a lot of the protein products saw sharply higher prices compared to year ago levels. Matter of fact, in the meat case, the inflation there is what's contributed to a very significant inflation on food at home. Those prices were up nearly 6% year over year. The CPI for food in total was up 4.5% year over year, and that's the highest 12-month inflation that we've seen since December 2011. So we've seen, again, due to COVID-19, due to some of the regional shortages that we had in our protein products, we've seen food prices jump sharply. I think we're going to see those prices come back down in the coming months. I think we've already seen the wholesale prices for beef and pork drop significantly from the record highs that they set just a couple months ago. And I think eventually, while retail prices tend to be sticky, I think we're going to see these prices come back down at the grocery store, assuming that we get this recent spread of coronavirus under control and we don't see states reverse their reopening procedures. When we talk about, and Deputy Secretary Sinski mentioned the ethanol industry, not only did they experience demand declines due to the stay-at-home orders, they also saw negative profit margins associated with the Russia-Saudi Arabia oil war. The reduced demand for gasoline pushed ethanol margins in the negative territory. in late March, and by mid-April, ethanol production was down more than 40% year over year. You saw plants idle capacity. Only the most efficient ethanol plants across the country continued to run during COVID-19. So there's an estimate today, the ethanol industry, damages to the ethanol industry around $4 billion, 3.5 to $4 billion due to coronavirus. We have seen ethanol production jump back up, although not as fast as we hoped. I think there's still a challenge with gasoline demand. And again, what we've seen in the last week with the spike in COVID cases, we've seen ethanol prices drop back down to negative territories relative to prior to the coronavirus, again, based on the uncertainty for ethanol demand through the remainder of this year due to the new spread of COVID cases. On the meat side, we had workers. The first situation was workers didn't want to come to the plants because they're afraid of getting sick. And then once COVID cases began to spread at meat packing facilities, we saw them shut down or idle their lines for a few weeks to go in and clean the facilities, let folks quarantine. So at one point in time, cattle slaughter was down more than 30%. It's bounced back. It's bounced back a lot faster than many had anticipated. We're now about 1% above year-ago levels. We're still cumulatively, when you look at processing for the whole year, we're about 850,000 head behind where we were last year. As the Deputy Secretary mentioned, hog processing has also bounced back. Last week, we were 8% above year-ago levels. We're still about 500,000 head below what we processed in 2019. And I think to put into perspective the backlog of animals that we have, while we're only 850,000 head behind on cattle and 500,000 head behind on hogs, on the hog side especially, we had new processing capacity come online in recent years, and we were expecting hog production to be record high. So in reality, there's far more market-ready animals on the hog side that are ready for processing than what we've got shackle space. And I think that's continued to put pressure on the lean hog prices currently. Live cattle prices are up slightly. The most nearby futures contract up slightly from where it was prior to World Health Organization declaring a pandemic. Many folks, obviously paid close attention to the live-to-cutout spread in the cattle markets. I think this particular chart, when you see that spread, again, in dollars per hundredweight, rise to a record level in mid-April, led to calls, Farm Bureau included. We got on the phone with the CFTC Chairman Tarbert. We were on the phone with USDA talking about the problems in the cattle markets. And we continue to work on that. We've got a cattle market working group looking into this particular issue. But that also, too, has recovered pretty quickly. We now see the live-to-cutout spread in line with historical levels. So USDA continues to investigate that very large spike, as do we. And we look forward to USDA's, the results of their investigation very, very soon. But this has been a major issue in the cattle markets and in the hog markets because we saw a very similar pattern emerge there, and our working group is looking into it on the hog side as well. When we look at the volatility that we've seen, these are the most nearby futures. So, for example, this is the December cotton contract. This is the August. I think it's the July hog contract. It's the August cattle contract, the July milk contract. So it doesn't tell the full story on what we've been through, but it tells the story on where we are and where we're looking to be through the remainder of this year. So Class 3 milk prices, they were down as much as 20% in mid-April. And on the back of USDA food purchasing program today, they're up 50% from where they were prior to COVID-19. We've seen a very, very sharp increase in cheese prices. That's led to that high Class 3 milk price. I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds on dairy, but there's some issues with what's called a producer price differential. So even though milk prices are really high, farmers aren't actually getting a whole lot more money today than what they were a couple months ago. But I think this chart does go to show the volatility that we've seen across the commodity markets for producers that were seeking to try and market their product at any point in time during COVID-19. The volatility that we've experienced is very real, and it's had a negative impact on farm income across the country. According to USDA's most recent estimates, if we compare the value of old crop and new crop commodities, we compare the value of production in 2020 and 2021 for just some of the top commodities, we're looking at a $42 billion decline in value. And that doesn't take into consideration specialty livestock. It doesn't take into consideration horticulture, nursery, aquaculture, specialty crops. So all in all, we're on the hill pointing out that we think the damages to agriculture are a lot bigger than this. They're a lot bigger than the $16 billion in CFAP assistance that's going out the door currently. And we hope this next Senate package will include $68 billion in Commodity Credit Corporation replenishment so that USDA can craft additional relief packages. At this point, we're working on the CFAP. The CARES Act put $9.5 billion in the Office of the Secretary. And in the sake of time, I'm going to move through this quickly because Deputy Secretary has mentioned this. We know that we've got direct payments going out for corn, soybeans, wheat, cotton, grain sorghum, etc. That money's going out the door currently. We got direct payments for cattle, direct payments for dairy producers, and direct payments for hogs and sheep as well. And if we want to get into that, I can provide more detail on the questions at the end. But of the total CFAP payments, cattle is expected to get $4 billion, dairy nearly $3 billion, specialty crops $2.3 billion, hogs $2 billion, corn, again, due to the decline in ethanol demand, we're looking at $2 billion, and some of the other specialty livestock, about $800 billion, about $16 billion in total expected to go out the door. As the Deputy Secretary mentioned, currently about $6 billion has gone out the door through the first 6 weeks of CFAP sign up. Producers do have until August 28th to prepare their CFAP paperwork. And you see there, Minnesota, about $375 million has been paid out so far to producers in the state. Iowa leads the country at $618 million. And USDA does update this data every single Monday on their website at farmers.gov. So you can keep track of how much money Minnesotans have received and the breakdown by commodity for the state as well. In addition to the direct payments, USDA had $3 billion to try to get surplus farm products from the farm to needy households. The first round of awards was $1.2 billion. Another $1.4 billion went out in awards a couple weeks ago through the Farmers to Families Food Box program. I want to say the president told us this week that they may have given out 40 million boxes of food so far. So I think we've seen the success of this program and the ability to address food insecurity in the U.S. And not only do we have a surplus food problem, we've got a huge labor market problem as a result of COVID. We've nearly wiped out all the jobs that we've gained over the last decade. So from January 2010 to February, we added 23 million jobs. We lost them all in 2 months due to coronavirus. We've added some of those jobs back as restaurants have started to reopen, but restaurants aren't going to go back to full capacity, neither are bars. So many of the leading economists look at this labor chart and say it's going to start to plateau, slow down. We're still going to be 15 million jobs in the hole due to COVID-19. I think the stimulus efforts that the administration is doing is trying to make that recovery fast. But we are going to have some challenges given the hiccups in getting restaurants back up and running. 11 million jobs is what we lost in the hospitality sector alone. So there's a big void in terms of employment that needs to still be filled to get back to the type of strong economy that we had prior to COVID-19. To try to address some of the food insecurity issues and unemployment, we did see the CARES Act boost nutrition program spending by about $24 billion. And I think that's what we're going to see then this is SNAP expenditure. So quote unquote food stamps, we spend about $60 to $70 billion a year on that. It has been trending down over the last 6 or 7 years due to a strong domestic economy. But I think given the high level of unemployment, the recession that we're in for, likely to be the second and third quarter at least of this year, we're going to see, SNAP expenditures increase to help address those needy households, make sure they have access to healthy and affordable food here in the United States. We're starting from a very good spot in terms of food security in the United States. U.S., we spend about 6% of our expenditures on food consumed at home. And you can see the correlation with per capita GDP, but we spend the lowest amount of our expenditures on food. So we're in a good place to start. I think there's certainly households that aren't in as good a spot as many Americans. I think that's where you're going to see that SNAP assistance, the expansion of the SNAP program, help those what's likely to be more food insecure households around the country due to the sharp rise in unemployment that we have. I think we have unemployment at this point about 35 million Americans today. Bringing that back to the farm level, what does concern me a little bit is, farm debt's record high, $425 billion. In an inflation-adjusted dollars, it's slightly below where we were in the 1980s. And when we think about the impact of high unemployment, the impact of that on off-farm income, the last time we had a similar situation was in the recession, and back in 08 and 09, we had a sharp drop in off-farm income. And with that was a sharp rise in farm loan delinquencies and also a sharp rise in farm bankruptcies. I just reviewed the most recent call report data showing that farm loan delinquencies this last quarter have increased to 2.8%. So they are increasing. I think that's going to have an impact on the ability of folks to service their debt. And we were already in a situation, while it's well below the historical highs, farm bankruptcies were up 23% over the last 12 months. So that's why it's so essential that the CARES Act and this next act passed by the Senate provides adequate financial support to agricultural families across the country so they can bridge the gap and make up for some of COVID-19 related financial losses. Kind of wrapping things up, looking on the trade front, obviously when you have a global recession, it's going to impact our ability to export. Year to date, U.S. farm exports are down about 4%, or $2.3 billion. Mexico and Canada, two of our top markets, sales are down there by more than $700 million year over year. China, obviously, on the back of the phase one's trying to buy more. They bought nearly $500 million more from us this year than they did last year. But just about in every single one of our top markets, Canada, Mexico, Japan, South Korea, they represent some 30 to 40% of our total ag trade. Our sales are lower this year than where they were last year. And again, that's a direct result of COVID-19 related economic disruptions. When we think about the phase one agreement with China, I think year to date, we've shipped about $5.5 billion worth of products to China. That's above where we were last year, but well below where it was in recent years. The only other year that you have to go back to 2009 and 2019 to find a slower pace of exports to China. And why is that important? It's important because the phase one agreement, the purchase commitments under the phase one agreement, China needs to buy some $30 billion worth of products from the United States to meet their purchase commitments. At this point, they're about 50% below the pace they need to hit that target. We have seen reports, China bought the largest corn purchase this past week. Over a 2-week period, I think they've had two very, very significant purchases of new crop corn. They've been in the new crop soybean market. They've done a lot of non-purchase things to make trade better in terms of approving plants for export. We've got pet food, ability to export pet food to China. 500 beef plants have been approved for export. So on the non-purchase side of the phase one, they're doing a lot to live up to that commitment. But at the end of the day, folks are going to want to look at what they're supposed to buy from us. And right now, those sales do need to accelerate to meet that target. And hopefully we'll get there, but we won't know that realistically until probably February 2021, given the 2-month lag in trade data. We have seen China buy a lot of livestock products. The only sector that China's bought more of this year than last year is on the livestock front. Pork exports to China are up 900% year over year. Other livestock were up about 160%. They bought a lot of poultry. I think they bought about $270 million worth of poultry so far this year. That's up over 1,000%. So very, very sharp increase in poultry exports to China. But on soybeans, on total grains and feeds, they're below where they were in previous years. So there's still a lot of room to grow there. And then kind of wrapping it up, even though we're expected to see large government payments in 2020, University of Missouri's Food Ag Policy Research Institute still shows net farm income trending lower in both 2020 and 2021. So I think we've still got some challenges ahead of us. We need to get on the other side of the COVID-19. We need to get our trade back to where it used to be. And I think those two things will go a long way to restoring our markets. The question many people have is, how do we, quote unquote, move away from the environment we've been in recent years that's involved dramatic levels of government support. In terms of direct payments this year, we're going to be over $30 billion this year. Last year, we were around $24 billion in government payments. And the year before that, it was about $14.5 billion in government payments. And so when you take these direct payments off the table, it becomes a lot more difficult to pencil out a decent bottom line on raising corn or raising soybeans, raising cotton or raising livestock with your lenders. So it's going to be a challenging environment in 2021 when we see these government payments disappear. I think as Deputy Secretary Sinskey has mentioned in his remarks, I think, as we move into next year, there is going to be, even the Secretary has it on his agenda, on sustainability and ag innovation. There's going to be a renewed emphasis on how agriculture can be part of the solution on climate. And while agriculture in the U.S. represents about 9.3% of total greenhouse gas emissions, we've got the ability to sequester carbon. Our livestock operations have the ability and potential to go net zero on emissions. So I think there's going to be renewed emphasis on that. Probably even more so if we're under a Biden administration. But what we've got to figure out is how do we make the economics of that work? How do growers get compensated for best practices that they've already done, early adopters? How do we get compensated for sequestering carbon in the soil? And I think, we're working on that. We don't know the answer to that yet, but it could end up being a revenue stream for agricultural producers moving forward. My thought is that the Biden folks will probably put a lot of money in the conservation title of the Farm Bill as a mechanism to improve the sustainability story of agriculture. But I think this is going to continue to be part of the conversation. We just need to figure out the mechanism to make it economically sustainable. So with that, we've got a great team of economists at AFBF, as President Pat mentioned. If you haven't checked out our market intel page, we put out content there 2 to 3 times a week. I think since COVID-19, we've probably written 40 or 50 articles, analysis on policy or markets. So if you haven't checked that out, be sure to check that out, or even follow me on Twitter at new10_ag-econ. So I hope I'm doing good on time. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that we may have.
Okay, Amber, we've got about 3 minutes for questions. Do we have any questions in the queue?
We do. The first question asks about how is the amount of hogs and protein that had to be euthanized being tracked or accounted for? I live near Worthington, Minnesota, and know the farmer who raised his hand to allow for the composting of the extremely large amount of hogs that had nowhere to go at market weight. You mentioned that we're ahead of processing amounts at this point in 2020 versus this point in 2019. We're not going to recover the amount of protein that had to be disposed of. It will never make it through the processing plants.
So that's an excellent question. What I do know is this next relief package is there's conversation about making sure that we can pay producers that had to depopulate, whether it's poultry or hogs. I've seen estimates that say as many as 4 million hogs had to be depopulated due to COVID-19. So I don't think anybody has an official number at this point, but you're exactly right. We're not going to get back to where we would have been outside of COVID-19. But I think folks are running at maximum capacity to try to move these animals through the supply chain.
Got time for one more question, Amber. Do we have anything in the queue? I guess for those that are thinking of a question, or as we wrap up here, a lot of great information, Dr. Newton. Appreciate it. As the guy that's kind of a visual learner, I love those charts and graphs and everything else. And if you're that type of Farm Bureau member or potential Farm Bureau member, take a look at market intel and making sure that you've got that ability. A lot of great information. Appreciate everything you do, Dr. Newton, your entire team. And it's not just ag policy, it's trade policy, it's regulations, everything ties into economics, and really appreciate your time and all you do for Farm Bureau. I still want to go back as I started. Yes, you've got Minnesota roots, whether it's Zorba's Pizza, Minnow Shots, or the Polar Plunge, but we still appreciate taking care of your family, and just wanted to make sure that everybody in Minnesota knows how connected you are, not only to Farm Bureau, but to farmers as well as your family. So thank you, Dr. Newton.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you for having me on this afternoon.
Appreciate all those that have dialed in or on the webinar today. We always appreciate those elected and appointed officials that can join us. I know today we've got representation from both our U.S. Senators, Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith, on the webinar. We appreciate that. At this time, I'd like again to thank everybody for what they've done and turn it over to our Executive Director, Karen Schaefer, for some closing comments. Karen, please.
Well, thank you, President Papp. Hold on. Okay. We're all in the same room here in the war room, so we have some technical difficulties being on audio at the same time, but this was a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Dr. Newton, for enlightening us on some of this data. It's obviously very current and very up to date, to the minute, which is very helpful. I really appreciate our teams here who are working really hard to put this together. COVID has obviously caused some economic challenges, but it has also challenged us in the office to get a little bit more innovative on how we deliver information to our members. And this is a prime example of something that has worked positively out of the pandemic. So we hope that you're enjoying this. If you guys have any feedback for the public policy team on topics or on things that you want to hear, we will definitely love to hear those suggestions. And we're so appreciative of you taking an hour out and spending it with us. So we also want to encourage those who are joining who are not members. This is one of the member benefits of being a Farm Bureau member, is getting not only access to this information on this call, but also to all of the market intel information that Dr. Newton shared. So we encourage you to explore what great membership has to offer here at the Minnesota Farm Bureau.
Thank you, Karen. And again, for those that are members, we thank you for your membership. Certainly membership is the lifeblood of this organization, our members at that local county Farm Bureau level. So if you've got a friend or neighbor that needs to know more about Farm Bureau, the services we offer, the benefits, as well as the advocacy at the local, state, and national level, we'd encourage you to take a look at the website or visit with a Farm Bureau member. With that, anything else, Amber, for the good of the day? Are we going to do it again next week? Can't hear you, Amber. So I know that on our screen, you could join us for Shop Talk next week. We'll be talking about grocers, supply chain, and consumer trends. So with that, that's Shop Talk for this week by Minnesota Farm Bureau. Appreciate everybody's attendance. Have a good day. I'm going to end the meeting.